an organization of residents of Princeton Borough and Township with diverse backgrounds, interests, and talents. Princeton Future has grown out of a concern that much of the planning and proposed development of the critical downtown spaces have been proceeding in an unconnected manner. The aim of Princeton Future is to assist the municipal authority to take a forward-looking and more comprehensive approach. Investigation and consultation undertaken by Princeton Future indicates that these objectives are achievable with good planning. More detailed studies and further involvement of all concerned parties are, however, clearly called for.
The movement and the traffic, which we will do, so any comments that come out of that today, please make. And you might look at that map or the aerial photograph in order to do that. So don't neglect anything that might have to do with traffic, pedestrian, and bicycles, even though they're not highlighted on this land use map that you have in front of you. The land use map does show us some things as we get to this area and to compare to the other two areas that we've studied. If the middle area that we studied last week were fully colored in rather than just on the street, this would be a big blue right here. And the northern end also had a lot of big blues that were belonging to the whole community in terms of people coming to them, the school, the recreation, the Valley Road building, which serves the whole community, and of course the township building. And then at the opposite end, of course, we have a regional pole with our commerce, and the buildings are all linked together. And actually, although they are identifiable independently as buildings, they actually form large blocks. Whereas this middle portion right here is particularly interesting and fascinating in the sense that nothing in it is physically large, but yet on the other hand, it has a mixed-use program. So it is one of those very complex, fine-grained entities that are rare in 20th century urban planning, that it mixes at a fine grain, so to speak, of individual structures on lots with front yards, backyards, and porches, and roofs, of which there are 2 or 3 types. So that this is, and yet it mixes in elements that the neighborhood uses primarily. So please address some thought to that area as well. And it would be interesting if at any of the tables, the history of the development, I mean, even some of the reds are, of course, in residential structures, and there may have been residential structures in some of the reds, for example, up here, that no longer have a house format. All right.
Good morning. How many of you here not attended a previous workshop? 2? Okay, great. I just wanted to go over a couple of things that we've sort of come to, at least at this point. In our first meeting, November 13th, we talked about our experiences, our reaction and responses to, and our desires for Witherspoon Street. And a set of values came out of that that I want to continually repeat. Witherspoon Street is valued for the shared experience. It engenders familiarity of people and places. It supports the history of its neighborhoods. It is home to the diversity of uses and people it serves. It is our street. Now, in our past 2 workshops, we've talked about areas that, as Michael has described, are mixed civic, institutional, and residential with some commercial. But what has come of the first two meetings seems to be quite strongly held as a potential statement where there are sort of four concerns with regard to a high priority that many of you have talked about, and that is the residential component. And it sort of has fallen out in 4 R's. The retention of residential, reversion of properties that may not be residential at this point to some or all residential use, reestablishment of a strong residential community and neighborhood, and reinforcing residential. And these are themes that came from it, and this is not to exclude commercial totally, but I think in the 2 sections that have been talked about, there are perhaps some regional commercial functions, but many of those commercial sites are in mixed-use structures that are both residential and commercial and have uses and scale that may and are serving more local population. Now, as usual, we're going to have our an hour and a half of discussion. We're going to summarize each table. We'll have a leader and a scribe. We have tapes, so it's important that you, at the beginning of your meeting, go around the table and identify yourself, because what we're going to try to do is, for the 3 meetings that we've had, is to have notes of the summaries and those published, those sent around to you in terms of the table participation groups, and then published so that others in the community can see it as well. They'll be sent around in email, so hopefully you will have provided your email addresses. And we're developing a website where it can be just drawn down as a link to a hard page. On some other administrative issues, we have November 13th meeting minutes that Sheldon Sturgis transcribed, and they are lengthy. He has sent them out to all who have submitted email addresses, and they too will hopefully be on the website. And our photographer is preparing the VHS or DVD mode so that it will air on TV 30, and hopefully people can get caught up, because whoever didn't attend any of the other meetings, we're going to continue our meetings. Our next meeting will be January 15th. But interim to that, we're hoping to have at least one meeting of the advisory group that I've described before, and several people have volunteered. Some will be enlisted, and hopefully, and that's not going to be a large group, but they will bring both experience, technical expertise, or a strong interest in the activity to actually attend more meetings and become even more committed in terms of time. Other than that, I think I want you to get started. With Michael at this table, Holly is at that table, and Kevin Wilkes and Alan Goodhart are at this table. So that's it. Do you have any questions?
I'm Holly Nelson.
Michael Moss.
No, that's the mic right there. Yeah. Let me just do quick introductions. Alan Goodhart.
Scott Sellers from Jefferson Road.
Susan.
Susan.
Matthew. Jean.
Gina Paul, John Street.
Andres.
Antonio.
Virginia Prescott.
And Hope.
Van Cleef.
So this morning we're going to discuss from, I guess, Franklin maybe? Down through, I suppose we could call it all the way to Nassau Street. But there really are sort of 2 distinct areas there, and with Wiggins making a division between the Central Business District and Wiggins and Robeson creating the boundary to the residential neighborhood of the Johns Witherspoon neighborhood. Witherspoon Street specifically at this point is still rising in elevation and grade. You're still driving uphill past, let me see now, we're at Lytle. And then we come down past, I guess, McLean. And we're still rising uphill here at Quarry. Witherspoon levels out right about there. And actually turns back downhill ever so slightly here. Right about here you can see the rest of the run of Witherspoon Street, whereas it's kind of veiled up to that point. And when we get to Green, we have the Arts Council in the corner. The cemetery takes up a large portion of the eastern side of the street in that neighborhood. There are a few commercial uses and buildings, one right on the corner, well, adjacent to the cemetery. There's a little white stucco in poor shape residential rental unit building which appears to be for rent right now. There's Shirley Court housing back here. There's the soon-to-be rebuilt Chinese takeout restaurant, which I believe will have residential above it in its new incarnation. It's going to have ground floor restaurant, upstairs residential. A nice set of homes that are pretty much intact and in reasonable shape through here. And then we have the little Witherspoon Muse project, where these buildings were renovated a couple years back and turned into residential. Not turned into, they were residential, they were rehabilitated. This is commercial, where the old radio location station used to be. This is a commercial brick building on the corner. Here is the public housing. And across the street we have the Clay Street Community Center, the Pinnell Community Center. Then we have an assortment of churches, residential units, a few spot commercial. Jefferson Plumbing is here, and Jefferson's Plumbing is back here. That's their showroom. The auto parts store, I believe, is departed that was there. It's vacant now. The dry cleaners is right there, so little neighborhood commercial. Then we have a couple, there's a travel agency, and there is a takeout food store, and there might even be a little grocery store in there now. I think is maybe down here. So there's sort of three.
Where's the drugstore?
Oh, I'm sorry, that's four is right there. Yes, indeed. Church, and the Arts Council. And the rest of this is residential, obviously, that backs up to the bulk of the residential neighborhood. And I think you all know downtown pretty well, so I won't really recount that. We have, in the past, started this discussion of the history of the neighborhood, but I think last Saturday, for those who were at this table, Wanda Gunning went through that in pretty good detail. So why don't we maybe think about the values of Witherspoon Street, and maybe, if you don't mind, let's focus a little bit in the neighborhood section, and then we might turn a little bit later to the central business district, because I think they are different issues. So does anyone want to set out for us some of the values that they feel are critical for Witherspoon Street in terms of the community, in terms of civic life, in terms of the issue of Witherspoon being a primary connection in the street system of Princeton to from downtown to the northern extremes. Does anyone want to?
Well, one of the most noticeable things I've found that's different from what I remember growing up here is that the language spoken on Witherspoon Street, it seems to me, is most often Spanish in that section. It's the main, the main walk, especially in the evening, for everybody coming uptown.
But that's
from the Hispanic community.
But that's largely on the west side of the street. The east side of the street is largely resident homeowners who are longtime residents and largely black.
Correct.
Yeah. The east side of the street's African American, English, and the west side of the street is
Hispanic.
is Spanish.
To the best of my knowledge, Central or Latin American businesses are based here, here, and there's a little bit over here. And I believe that's it.
And where are most of the houses that the Hispanics live in, or are they clustered? Where would you?
A lot on
Scattered.
Lytle.
Where would you put your
They're
hand?
scattered everywhere.
A lot on Lytle. A fair amount on McLean.
A lot on Witherspoon.
A lot on Witherspoon. I don't know Quarry personally well enough to say. Does anybody?
Not so much on Quarry, not so much.
And not so
on
much down
Green.
here, right.
It's on John, of course.
And John, yes.
So,
So it's sort of a zone, and then really actually in here, and then I think mixed down in here.
Well, all
There's
along
a
John.
yeah.
I mean, some things like this, you're talking about history, this was an old black elementary school, which long ago turned into essentially apartments, and largely occupied by Hispanic families. I think it's fairly well kept.
One of the things that occurs to me is that the streetscape and the buildings in this particular zone are in better shape than the two previous zones that we have discussed. Many of these buildings really only need repair and maintenance and some TLC, and I find that there are only less than, I would count on one hand, buildings that I would consider candidates for replacement. Whereas in some of the zones we've talked about before, there are a number of buildings that I believe could be candidates for replacement. And visually, to me, one of the values I'd like to lay out for this area is the streetscape. Although it's tattered at certain edges and a rundown here and there, it seems largely intact and seems largely reflective of the historical past of the community. And to me, that's a valuable asset.
I would say, this is an overstatement, but I would say that this area doesn't need a lot of anything except for continuity in what it already has. And that's, there's a lot of diversity, there's a lot of history and community feeling there. And it's very difficult to come in and engineer an improvement to that.
Well, and
That's something that that organically develops over time.
Right, and I think one of the things that traffic actually moves slower here, whether it wants to or not, I suppose. But traffic does move slower here because the road is narrower than it is in the township area. It just doesn't.
When I lived on Mercer Street, and the Mercer Hill Association came into being because the borough was really, it just made me realize the extent to which the neighborhoods are threatened. And I think the same is true of the Tree Streets. The Tree Street neighborhoods on East Nassau, the thing which came out so clearly was they don't want to be part of downtown. They didn't see themselves as part of downtown. And I think the same I think the same is true here, that we must contain.
Well, I think there are two ways to look at it. One is what I guess I share. I don't want the creep, but I realize that in real life there are certain tendencies that economics and perceived patterns of what is what happen. So if, commercial seems to happen on major arteries, more major streets, and whether you can bring it to a dead stop or not becomes a question of how. If the goal is to limit that, put a cap on it, channel it in a direction that's the best for the neighborhood, I think that's...
Well, the community, not just the neighborhood.
True, community or community, neighborhoods and a bigger community, that's maybe what we want to accomplish. So I think to talk about, yes, there probably is the desire for certain kinds of commercial to move in that direction, or Harrison Street or whatever, Chestnut, I don't know. Then we say let's accept that and then channel it, or put a stop to it. Is it possible to put a total stop? So I think that's my point of view, channeling, shaping things, but somewhat realistically saying what is possible. And at that point, I say mix of retail and lots of residential. That counteracts it always. But what kind of residential? Is it single-family homes on half an acre? I don't think so. So that becomes another part of the discussion. Yeah. Well, there are people who mention those things.
Well, last week there were two tables that reached distinctly different conclusions about what should happen in here, as I understood it. I think one table concluded that it should be directed more toward residential development. And there's some logic to that. As more residential is built here and more perhaps residential is built on the hospital site, that would tend to consolidate that residential neighborhood. The table is important to maintain the mix of at least ground floor commercial space along Witherspoon Street in this neighborhood. But I guess I'd still like to see us perhaps revisit that question. Now, I don't know if we have time to deal with what needs to be discussed here as well as that, but I think in some respects this is a more crucial question. Pardon me?
I think it's a really crucial question. And I think
Which is?
whether there's a distinct change in character at Paul Robeson or not. And people will have different answers to that question, but I think it's important that those thoughts are heard, and perhaps through the discussion there'll be some modification of what we think, and maybe there won't.
I think there is a distinguishable change of character at Paul Robeson and Wiggins. When you look out the window here, and even up to the library, you do see buildings that are generally taller than 2 stories. They might have residential on the first floor only, and I'm sorry, commercial on the first floor only, and then residential above them. But they might have residential or commercial all the way up. So I think that there are distinctive features to both sections. You're talking about the southern section and the middle section here already, and if I would not at all be in favor of continuing this type of development down further down Witherspoon Street, or at least in the middle section. You do have some with the hospital in terms of the height of the building, and then further down you have some with the township hall. I guess the concerns that I have about the creeping of business or commercial into the residential area is that it does give a foothold for the continuing diminishing of residential properties and the basic nature of the street. So that is that's a concern that I have. I would not want to see a plan put into place that would eliminate many of the current residences in favor of building new structures that would be on the first floor commercial, and then above them residential. I would not be in favor of a plan that would do that.
When you say that, are you thinking in terms of use only, or are you thinking in terms of use as well as size of what that structure might be?
Both. But primarily use. I would not be in favor of a plan that would eliminate or destroy the current current houses that are there, in favor of installing a commercial residential mix.
Thing that just
Yep.
happened, yeah.
Yep. Exactly like that.
Well, the flip side of that same question, I think it's exactly the same question, is whether or not it should, in fact, perhaps go more the other way and begin to diminish or encourage the change of commercial to more residential.
Yeah.
That's
so
what I said
this
last week
orange
at my
one
table.
turn into
I said where there is opportunity to regain residential properties that are currently mixed commercial and residential, let's take that opportunity. Let's pursue those opportunities. I think for many, many reasons,
And one reason is that there is likely to be some commercial opportunity at the northern end of Witherspoon with the hospital. Well, I shouldn't say likely, but there's a possibility that could be developed there. So yeah, that's exactly what I said.
Possibility.
Well, we're talking. Who knows? Keep your eyes open and keep asking for the process to be transparent. Okay?
Right.
You're right at Birch Avenue. I'm on John Street. You're Birch, right, or Lee? Lee. Yeah. Keep your eyes open.
But the thing about transparency is, as much as you ask for it, do you ever get it?
Well.
And you don't know if you have it or not until you find out that perhaps you didn't.
Right.
Well, I guess to pursue this just a little bit.
Back to where we're supposed to work, which is there are many questions about that. Well, let me give you some. For example, the Borough Council this week decided not to have a bus stop.
It did? No.
Yeah.
Not to have a bus stop.
What do you
where?
mean?
Where?
No bus
Here?
shelter.
What?
Yes.
Where?
Where?
There.
Right
Oh,
here?
come on.
I'm
Okay,
not.
well-
I don't.
Help me
Sheldon,
out.
I
Where's
don't have
here?
to make things up. The world is so
Where
crazy.
is here? Where is here?
Well,
This
it was
is-
supposed to be, this
We've
is
been
the
fighting for
the
2
school
years to
square.
keep this
Oh,
to be a public square with a bus stop.
Yeah.
Okay,
And they gave up.
everybody,
No
this
bus
was
stop.
on a council meeting, right, voted? Agenda is published somewhere?
Well, no, it's in
Open
the
process?
newspapers.
Okay, well, whatever.
My point is there are many things about the community uses
Okay.
and the diversity
Where
of
were
the
we not
community
protesting?
in that area. There is,
Did
for
they
example,
explain why they didn't want to have it?
well,
Curious.
it's the fault of the library. Really, seriously, the old library. You may quote me on this. The old library
You're being taped.
had a beautiful entrance in terms of social use. It had a canopy. It had a place for kids to meet with bicycles. And it provided the bus stop. It was really the bus stop. The new library pays very little attention to kind of social use.
Except for this room.
Yeah, well,
That's
and
huge.
it's only the result of our arguing, because there would have been no windows and no, anyway, all right. But so now, that lobby,
So
which
where's
is
the
often
bus stop?
closed, often locked, is going to be the bus stop.
The what's going to be the bus stop?
The lobby of the library is the only bus stop. I mean, I'm not saying we
It's gonna
can't.
be de facto.
Well, that's
All I
all.
can say is there
Flip
is
side, maybe it's sort of good.
there is lack of sensitivity to people in this area that we ought to really address. And
You mean
it's-
there's a lack of sensitivity to people not in cars, right? Like basically the whole
Or to
reason
the
why there
public
is a downtown
functions
is so that
of-
people don't have to be driving. They can get out of their car and walk around or take the bus somewhere.
Well, the bottom 25% of the economic spectrum takes the bus, and
right.
the
So
representatives.
they'll hang up in a lobby, that's good.
No, they want the
does.
lobby to be closed. Come on.
Okay, so is there
there a bus
going
after
to
8
there's
o'clock?
not going to be a formal bus stop?
Shelter.
That's right.
Oh, bus
I thought there was some
shelter.
money.
There's not going to be a bus shelter there.
Okay.
Will there
But
be a
there will be a
stop?
bus stop.
Yeah, but where are the people going to stay?
Yeah, okay.
Right, okay,
Okay.
right.
So
I mean,
is that
I'll give you an
It's a
example.
huge discussion.
It's like a blood test, you know. It's just an example of not thinking about people in the downtown. And I think that it's a shame. There's going
And
to
that
be.
brings, I
Now wait,
think,
wait,
okay,
wait,
go ahead.
before we go on. There's also going to be the development of this big site
This
here.
corner here.
Right. Yeah.
Wait, I thought
Not
that
much.
was supposed to be parking according to the deed.
No.
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 who's developing it?
This is
and into
private
what?
property, and I've
the
heard
Griggs
rumors of it to be.
Sheldon knows
Uh,
it.
Michael, it is the most sort of historically relevant property
Isn't it owned by-
along the whole street, I think,
Right.
for the African-American neighborhood. Burnett Griggs and his wife owned it. And
Did you say present tense, continuing?
They do own
Okay.
it. Yeah, sorry, but they're dead. Their daughters, their grandchildren.
Okay.
Help me, Michael.
Yeah, but
Wendy,
yeah,
is it Grand?
Bernetta Griggs is still alive.
Right. Okay, thank
The
you.
mother of the two daughters.
And so there's economic value there that they want to get out of it.
Yeah.
And then there's the historical value that needs to be recognized. And then there's what does the community want to have happen. and then there are the people that live here. What would they like to have happen? And all those voices need to be heard.
So is there a plan? Have they haven't sold it
Wendy
yet?
has come to a Princeton Future meeting and has said we basically want to have a building there that's just like this. It's an extension of the Hull Fish office, mixed use.
And to have a building, you have to have a parking for it.
And that's what stopped it at the moment. So when the borough decides what the traffic habits of the garage are, they will then be making available, maybe for auction, the rights to all the owned buildings here to come and get parking, and that is going to be a big
Parking shares. that
because
we
if you get
traded on free
enough parking, then they can go up, and have.
Right.
Yeah, to get a building there, you have to have parking unless you're the Arts Council.
Exactly.
They might
Well-
not be able to get a building there, but
All the buildings in downtown, as I understand it, sort of share in a concept of shared parking. One parking spot serves many different people over 24 hours. And of course, who understands those counts and those needs? It's, you need a major computer to figure it out and the correct data, which is a whole other story.
It would be interesting just to go around the table and ask each person to say, I would like a park there, I would like an office building, I would like an apartment. What are the uses as citizens of the town that we would like there?
In 1992, I believe, I went to the Borough Council and suggested, not knowing the Griggs, but knowing a little bit of the history, that we be encouraged to develop there a commercial zone that would bring black-owned businesses back into the downtown. It's in the paper. It's in the record. You can go
That's a
and
very
see it.
good idea, Hendricks,
So-
because
Would you accomplish that?
How?
The
An
ownership
infusion.
part. The
Well, it's
ownership
owned.
part.
Well, it's and
It is
would.
owned, yeah, but
an
it would have to be
infusion- yeah.
restricted that only businesses with the majority interest.
In 2004, I could expand that to minority owned at this point. I mean, we can progress, but
he had Mr. Griggs had a fish market here, and the Imperial Restaurant was here, and their home was here with a white picket fence.
What was Bill Clinton's program called that was moving in this? You asked how would you accomplish it?
Urban enterprise.
Urban enterprise zone. That's basically what it was. What I was talking
and
about.
one of the-
in 1991 or 1992.
One of the most
Could've
exciting precedents might be included in that zone is the Moore I believe, had $500,000 in 1910 or something like that. Don Moore's grandfather, I think. But this is a black-owned area too, still. And I think that's a good idea.
I think ownership is one issue and important. What the use and what the buildings are is the one that will be more visible on a daily basis, and what works for the people in downtown. And there will be different kinds of people, those who live and come downstairs for coffee, those who come from near neighborhood and do whatever, as we do, and those who drive in, work here, and use the services.
May I ask a
So
question?
I think that's maybe talking about people, as Mr. Getty started about, is also the layer we should talk about.
As background for
Let
myself,
me just interject before you go. In that area you're speaking about, which is, I guess, from here to Nassau Street, my grandfather used to own a business there too.
Did he?
African American.
On Witherspoon?
What was the business, Jefferson?
He had a fish market, and he sold groceries and what have you.
Where
I believe
exactly
it's
was that?
43 and a half. This is going back into the 1900s.
I don't know, it's somewhere, yeah.
Somewhere in that area.
That's very interesting.
I just thought I'd bring that up.
I'm not sure. I think when we did the introductions, you were not here. perhaps.
Judson
No, I
Carter.
was not
The
here.
stage is yours.
Judson has been the preacher at First Baptist Church.
Well, that's not true.
Oh.
My name is Reverend J.M. Carter. I'm from Trenton. I was born in Princeton here, and I went to Princeton School. However, I do have a lot of organizations that I do belong in Princeton, and I'm concerned about Princeton.
Your brother lives 2 houses down from me.
And yes, we do have a home now.
Change the travel agency and the cleaners here to accommodate the neighbors. It would not necessarily have to do it because it's busy, it's activity. I mean, you stop in on your way too.
Right. I'm just saying, it's an opportunity for someone to make money, and that's how they look at it.
But it has an economic driver as well, because people can't afford rents here.
Exactly.
As you get more traffic there, then you're going to have commercial creep.
If the residential component of this neighborhood stays as it is now, it will not push out these businesses.
That's right.
Because you're going to stay where the money is.
But, okay, but will they push it out, or will they get the older buildings must be basically knocked down like Barsky and put up new structures that are...
Well, that is the fear.
Is that a fear, or is that...
It is a fear for me.
But if they put up nicer structures, better structures, some of those...
What's nicer than an older building?
An old building?
What's nicer than
my
103-year-old
but there are some old
I
buildings
love my
that are...
103-year-old house. Thank you very much.
But you're in good shape. You put. I know your house. I walk by it all the time. You maintain the house beautifully. There are other people, unfortunately, that do not maintain it.
You're right.
That's the houses that tend to go because you have pride in your house. These other people don't have the pride. They do not
have the
maintain
pride.
it.
They don't necessarily have the resources.
They don't.
But they're landlords too, and they have tenants.
Demolition by neglect.
Right.
Yeah. They're tenants. Oh, listen. I mean, I remember a few years ago where the house was so overcrowded that the facilities could not maintain it. Guys were throwing waste out the window, throwing human waste out the window. It was absurd.
But you know, Barry, you said something, a well-built modern building is better than an old house. But let's talk a little bit about Barry.
Not in terms of maintaining
but let's talk about the scale of this neighborhood.
The scale is very important.
Yeah, because the scale is where the creep is noticeable.
Do we want one single
Well,
family,
the zoning at the moment prevents buildings that are higher than 36 feet.
But they
Defined in terms of.
But they can be bulky and aggressive at 36
Yes, well,
feet.
I mean, the new thing on Nassau Street is a monster.
Yeah, but then you have the muse here.
Which one?
Where
next to
the
Wild
house,
Oats.
there used to be an old
The one
house.
that burned down.
And it's between
Yeah.
J Cycle
Right.
and the Verizon building.
No, Oaks, Wild Oaks. Isn't it?
It fits the zoning.
Well, I want to continue
yes,
the discussion
unfortunately.
over the whole territory. One of the issues that just came up at the very end there does include the residential component of non-owners or renters, and we have a variety of renters. And some of them are living, some of these properties have been converted into essentially rooming houses. Some of that is happening, by the way, in the red zone.
It is.
So by moving on to the red zone, I don't want to eliminate any suggestions we might have for what the whole town and the whole community might need. My suspicion is we can't solve the transient residential problem. And when I was in New York, I did a lot of work in what's called the single room occupancy hotel situation, which is that New York being a magnet for all kinds of people, had evolved a housing type that ranged from the YMCA and the Salvation Army to very upscale residential hotels. The Barbizon and the St. Regis were residential hotels. And then there was everything in between for people who lived as single people. We actually have that problem in this community now. So maybe we can think if there's anything we want to say about that. It's certainly true now of some of the upstairs properties here.
Wait, but you're talking about single people not living alone but grouped together in these
Well-
properties, is that right?
Well, I'm
Yes.
assuming that some of those are being run as rooming houses.
And they pay by the week.
But there have always been
There's
such
8
things.
people.
Oh,
there's
right.
Eight,
No, there should be.
8 people in a 2-bedroom apartment that are being paid strictly by cash, by the week. And one of these buildings is up for sale. The guy wants a ridiculous amount of money. Nobody is willing to pay it because he can't prove his income stream. And the thing is, this same gentleman owns a few houses along the street in this area. He's doing the exact same thing. I have a personal friend who was a real estate broker who was part of the firm that was collecting rent, quit the job because she didn't feel safe walking into these places. It was absurd.
We know this exists, and
We want to, can we do something to
This
prevent
compound,
this
the
from
reason I'm
going
telling
on?
the story, Wanda, in the
It's
end
a
is
serious
what I did for 10 years in New York was justify this housing type to everybody I could give a talk to, in the sense that it is extremely valid housing type. In 1985, there were 285,000 women over the age of 65 living alone in New York City, and their stock was being demolished due to gentrification. So we have a rooming house history, boarding house, residential hotel for single people. It is now coming to our attention that we have a community of renters who are not capable of buying a single family home and are yet in some way, this is up for discussion as you know,
But
part of the
Jeff, you
community.
make a point, and we know this, I mean, for years.
Yeah.
So
But we
don't,
hit- right.
yeah, but that's,
We have a
we
chance
know
to
that.
solve that issue.
No, this won't do it.
Well, it's a
No,
start.
we're not
You
without.
gotta start.
Okay, fine. But,
It's been that way for 100 years.
and it is a problem. People in the community recognize it
I'm
as
not
a
willing
problem.
to accept it.
But the point is, if it is, we have been to court 2 times to try to solve this issue. And about $75,000 later, it was taken care of for 1 month, only to resurface. And that's the kind of thing that we are aware of, but it's not so easily resolved
I
as
agree.
one might think. We are, the borough is working on it because it is a problem. But when you, even if you solve this issue, you're going to only bring about another problem, because the only way to resolve this is to allow the varsity, and I'm picking on them to a degree, but to allow the varsity effect
Type
to
of
happen.
development,
you
type
know?
of development.
And so you then, I mean, it's what do you want? What is the balance? That is the problem. What is the balance?
Let me just understand.
But Varsity is not going to solve the fact that
No.
these people need a place to live
That's
here.
right.
They need
That's
some
right.
sort
That's
of
right.
accommodation. Are we going to say that they can't live here because we're going to
It's
solve
not, it's
all
the economics that are gonna,
Well,
the economics.
Well, it's something that
there
that
has
has
to be some place that people live who are in
But we
this
can't
situation.
increase, the only way we could increase the number of acceptable residences for the single occupant would go against some of the things we've just said. My feeling is that that this locale and this neighborhood cannot solve this problem without changing the neighborhood. So that other avenues have to be taken by the entire community.
This neighborhood cannot solve the problems of all of the crowdiness that's necessary to serve all of Princeton.
I agree entirely.
And it can't do it.
Right. Absolutely.
What should be prevented? I mean, the things you've talked about are essentially illegal. A single-family dwelling can have 2 renters in it. Okay, you need to be formally declared to be a rooming house to
You have
do
to
all of
enforce
these
the
things.
codes that we have, and they're not being.
I'm sorry?
You've got to enforce the codes that we have.
Well, that's right. But
They're
the
not-
the zoning officer.
Well, the zoning
can't
officer
peer
and the
in
borough
everyone's
council are
window.
on this case.
But
Does
what we
Princeton
can
have
say
rooming
as a
houses?
group.
Not legally.
But I mean, there's the possibility of having them, but they just don't legally have them.
Well,
Thought you
there are
just said that-
limits on what you can do in terms of a house owner and renting out rooms. You can rent out 2.
Okay, but you said this thing about it would have to be declared a rooming
Well,
house. I was wondering if that
there
was
used to be
actually-
a rooming house up on Nassau Street.
A rooming house is an official
And it's an
designation.
official designation, and you can, I guess, seek permission to put one in.
Sure.
But if people are breaking the law, that's something the enforcement in principle can catch up with, but it's very difficult to do. But the point that we made earlier, which I think is very important for this to keep the density level,
right,
is the issue about being able to consolidate lots and build condos. I mean, a change or a statement in the zoning of this area to say that only single and two-family housing units are allowed as of right, and that sort of thing, and it can still be RB.
Will you allow business still to be
That's
there?
a borough council issue. You've got to get borough council to make that amendment
this is
to
our
the zoning.
chance
I
to
mean,
talk.
it goes through presumably the planning board.
Maybe a little history on the Witherspoon views. Was that one lot, or was that?
There was
that an assemblage?
You mean the old Shirley Court?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, that
There
was.
was a row house structure there.
When Palmer Square began tearing down things on John Street and in this area, a number of developers from places like Jersey City and so on moved in and began to put up multiple housing, and Shirley Court was one of these.
That's 16 units.
And it was, I think it was fairly popular. It wasn't incredibly well built. And there are a couple of other
Well, this is
places.
brand new.
This is brand new.
Those are the borough's affordable housing program.
The borough bought
They
Shirley
bought the
Court.
old ones and tore them down.
Right.
And they also did the houses on
McLean Street.
McLean Street at the same time. That group right there.
But there were a couple of
But it
other
was
of these developers.
so that was a single lot to begin with.
The developer, I think, picked up.
Years ago.
I want to keep going down here at this end just to make sure that we don't neglect it.
But he bought land for 2 or 3
Right. Oh, yeah, right, and consolidated, yes.
This property right across from us, right here, out that window.
The parking lot.
The parking lot, the old gas
Parking lot,
station.
the Briggs.
The owners have suggested that they wish to go forward with
Right.
development. I don't know if anything's happened with that or.
No, not recently. Not recently. There is talk, but not recently. We rent that from the owners. The borough rents that property from the owners and uses it as a parking lot.
But presumably now the garage is in, the case for renting this is lower. Or
Well,
not, I don't know.
except the borough probably would continue to rent it as long as they are willing to rent it to us. Will continue to
Yeah.
lease it as long as they are willing to rent it to us. But there is some talk with the daughters of the owner of that property. Owners actually deceased, so the daughters own it now. That they are going to,
Build
they want to
something.
develop it.
No, I mean, I would have thought that was much better
Yeah,
rental
it would be.
return than
Right.
parking.
It will be, yeah.
From this corner all the way to
Heidi
Nassau Street.
wants to know what it's zoned, it's zoned commercial business.
I think this is the fully commercial.
It's
zone.
commercial.
It's
The
part of
problem
the
with this
CBD.
property
It's
is
part of the
they-
central business district.
The father who owned this property didn't want to develop it because of the lawsuit he had with the borough. Remember years ago
yeah,
over the
okay.
urban renewal thing, and he was a proponent, a severe, adamant proponent of affordable housing, because he's the same man owned Griggs Farm. He sold that land for Griggs Farm. That's the same owner of that. And so he wanted to keep it for something for the town, for the minority groups of the town. But now he's dead and the daughters are in and they're going to develop it.
What happened?
Okay. We haven't talked about the circulation issues. Barry, do you have something?
Well, I mean, I will make two or three. Is that to some extent the cemetery turns its back to Witherspoon Street. There's a wonderful tradition and history of cemeteries becoming sort of walk around, visit the
dead, look at the interesting tombstones.
Bike lane.
You know, stranger things have happened.
It does. It works.
But why not? I agree. How come they only have one entrance to this cemetery?
The one entrance to the cemetery is buried back here, right there.
Yeah.
And there are 3 that I count closed entrances. One off of Green, one off of McLean.
There's one
there.
This is the old black entrance.
And the corner.
The Negro Cemetery, they call it.
And the corner is completely sort of sealed
There's a
up.
bunch of fences, openings down there that are locked too.
And does anyone have any feeling about that? Does anyone feel that I have no idea, you know, what kind of group is behind this, whether they're interested at all in
I'll
our
tell you
issues.
one thing we got going
But how
for
could the
us.
street, could the cemetery, could this park that exists here, full of people that aren't going anywhere, could that become part of the city fabric somehow more than it is today?
I absolutely.
why
I
not?
was thinking of bringing that up too because we got a bargaining chip in the bigger scheme of things with the hospital. They want that.
The cemetery wants this, yes. But
That's right.
But is
Well-
that good for us? The rest of
Well,
the town.
there's you make a deal.
Yeah.
And
Who's
the
they?
deal- The
Cemetery.
Presbyterian.
Nassau Presbyterian Church.
Is that who it is?
This is
a parking lot right now?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the surface park.
Well, would it be in the town's interest under any circumstances to give that up in return for getting the whole cemetery as a park? Under limited
that would
circumstances.
set
You know-
the cat among the pigeons.
I
Boy, what
just
an idea.
just
It'd
a
be
little
great.
history going back about a year or two. I wonder if what they're concerned about is vandals and the like.
I'm sure it
Remember
is.
that
Yeah.
sign?
I'm
that
sure-
was
I'm
the,
sure it
the
is.
cemetery sign was stolen, and they put
and
up
I'm-
that
and
big
I'm-
stone now.
And you know,
I'm sure they're
worried about
anything that
Still
makes
is.
it become more public space would need to simultaneously address those issues of supervision or monitoring or whatever.
Well,
I'm not
and
saying,
also locked at
I'm really
night.
not saying unlock those 2 gates and we're done. I actually think there's a design strategy, but then there's a sort of an attitude shift into what that space could
Well,
be.
because, I mean, I think that in order to kind of stop vandalism, you have to kind of make it very open so that people can just kind of look in and see. If you keep up a lot of gates and a kind of a lot of closed cover,
In fact-
but you open it up to the public,
Exactly.
key candidate for vandalism.
You're
Kids will go there,
so right.
nobody can see me. We can
Exactly
just go in
correct.
there and do whatever we want, leave our garbage, and
Andres
make
is
it. And that would be
correct.
you'd have
Why
to
does he know
open
about
it up.
this?
How does he know about this?
Well, it
Some
happened-
teenagers told him about it. He heard it.
Yeah. Well, it happened at our
don't know.
street with the Geostream walk. They put a bench,
yes.
and it was kind of in
Exactly.
the
We
stream,
talked about
and then there
that.
was beer
Yeah.
bottles and stuff. So
Right.
then
Yeah.
we moved it out, and
Well, true,
And
but
that end over there is historically, no, right in the middle.
Right there.
Historically sensitive because that's President's Row. If you open up this area, Aaron Burr is right there ready to be.
I don't think anyone's going to take him.
I think people
Let
ought to
him
know
go
more
visit
that he's.
him.
Well,
I mean,
that's where.
He's a great American.
well, but
to find out, I actually went in there one day to track down these famous people, and it was hard work. It was like
Yeah,
George
it was
Bush. It was
very-
hard. You know? I had to work late. You know?
Did you find Menendez?
No.
Menendez are buried in there.
And you know, those kinds of things, I mean, when you go to Paris, one of the major sort of tourist attractions is looking at the cemeteries in the city. And this is a really interesting cemetery. And it sits here with its back to this neighborhood. And it just occurs to me that there is some potential there.
well, also if you want to learn plant materials in Boston, you go to the Mount Auburn
Well, I was going
Cemetery.
to say, I
Which
used
is
to
an
live-
incredible.
Plus, they have
When I was a
the
child,
elm tree in that.
we lived next to the
yeah,
Mount
I was
Auburn
about to
Cemetery
die.
for a while.
No, it's the one that's
And-
immune to Dutch elm
And it
disease.
was our total, complete playground. And it was great, the
There's lots of
Mount Auburn
trees down
Cemetery.
in Washington, I think. from that.
During the war, we played Kill the Germans games in the Mount Auburn Cemetery.
But no, there's a natural access here
But aside from
for
that-
getting bike traffic through there.
No,
between the
there
high
are
school-
opportunities in here.
But you know, this could be, Mike, you're right, those are concerns, but it could be portions are fenced, like the historic sections, or some individual sections if there's, because the church may have deal with.
Right.
with
President's
certain-
Row could be fenced off. And
With the gate.
And I'm actually, I don't imagine the entire gate's fence is ripped out. I think that'd be a mistake. I just think there should be some welcoming points of entrance.
Well, they could unlock the gates to start with.
Do you know, it also
But they're
would
just so
serve-
nasty, and there's
it
no
would
reason
serve a,
landscape.
It could serve a really wonderful role in the community, which is so incredibly proud of its history. And
you know, how many of us actually have done what you did and gone in and tried to find things, and it's as though it brings to life in a different way the history of the town.
What's the,
And it's
any
a
Presbyterians here
wonderful
know
idea.
whether they need the money? Because this, if this is in the public interest and it's a private-public contract, some kind
Yeah.
of deal where hospital gets more space, but then they,
I mean, the cemetery.
Yeah, I'll flip it.
just flip it.
I remember how to do this. I did last time.
No, hit the red and the black together.
it's
oh, you
going
did?
around.
You got it. You did.
Just read along.
Okay.
The Presbyterians needing money, the ones on Nassau Street don't, the Witherspoon Street one does.
Well, but see, the thing is, the kind of development for public use could be at public expense.
Yes.
And then what the Presbyterian, what the cemetery people get is more space, and
we
then
take,
there can become some kind of nice entry development
Yeah, I
without
agree.
taking the whole
It's on
thing.
the- not
And
more
plus,
streets.
Walking up Franklin,
signs.
No, we usually just, a
Plus,
lot of kids just go to
through
Haven, so we
pathway,
take,
sort of
forget the name of the
encourage
street,
people
it's-
on
Couldn't,
it.
couldn't the historic signage system also
the other
carry
side,
into the
not more
Johns
of the other one.
Witherspoon
We take that up
neighborhood?
to
And
Nassau
part of the
Street
history that
go to
Wanda
Nassau,
spoke
and
about,
then
about
we go
different
to Nassau Street,
businesses
and
up and
there
down the
just
street,
come like that,
this
and
could
back.
all be
So you
tied
wouldn't-
together almost in a kind of
No.
a history
Franklin
trail,
across
which
the
was
top.
not actually Witherspoon Street, which actually took you through
Probably
here,
not.
then
Because a lot of
across
people
and up and through
either
and back out.
either
in a
walk
sort
or
of
drive.
cross
So
reading
I mean, not
to
that
the,
you need to drive,
you
it's
know,
not very
the,
far,
the
but
commercial
These days.
straight
Yeah.
through line.
Well, that is a love idea. It's a really interesting idea.
Does anyone feel that this area is appropriate for a historic preservation overlay zone? Specifically, these homes that face Witherspoon Street that, you know, may need some maintenance. Nonetheless, there's an argument to be made that they represent scale, detailing, and character from a particular time period. And how would people feel about that?
Especially if it had planning impact, like maintaining residential uses. And
Would that increase the amount of control that people have over maintaining it as a?
Possibly, because
As
then
residential
possibly you could envision a community-based or less likely, but possibly municipal-based sort of neighborhood improvement association or group that could make loans for historic facade preservation or facade
Are there
restoration.
any others in town?
Yes, Mountain Avenue has one in the township. The borough has a couple that Wanda could tell us about, I'm sure. But yes, there are a number. In both the town and the
Jugtown is one.
the town and the borough.
Why not explore it? I think it's
Yeah.
I think it's worth
sounds like a
looking at.
real possibility.
Should we move to downtown? On my notes,
Uptown.
Excuse me, uptown. Excuse me.
I thought we always have called it uptown.
Yeah.
No matter
one
where-
one
where
last.
you've lived.
If you're in a car, you don't notice it, but if you're on
You-
foot.
but-
Oh, no, if you're
but you know
walking,
what
it's uptown.
Yeah,
No,
definitely
yeah,
uptown.
but you go uptown to downtown Princeton.
No, we've always gone uptown.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about uptown.
Uptown.
But maybe as a way of introducing it, I was saddened to read that the bus shelter for out here fell through on account of, I don't know, it seemed like incompetence, but they just couldn't figure out what they were doing. And obviously it didn't occur to anyone to make plans enough ahead of time to have this figured out. So, but I see people sitting, waiting for the bus over here in front of the Arts Council, and I see various things. Does anyone have any sense of the series of bus shelters or something that might further identify public transportation system in this area? Would that have any benefit or not?
You said that there was one supposed to be built.
Supposed to build, I think it was supposed to be right outside here.
Yeah.
And there was an article in the paper this week that said that basically they couldn't get their act together and figure out where to put it. And
New Jersey Transit claimed it was good, there wasn't enough space.
everyone's sitting around doing this, and so now they've given up on it.
Well,
Yeah,
who are
but-
they, though?
Maybe it has to be encouraged privately.
I'm not certain whether
like the
New Jersey
kiosk.
Transit.
Is it that
The university chipped in some money for it, and New Jersey Transit was supposed to do it, and these people were supposed.
little roof?
You know,
You would
think it would
An
be
umbrella.
easy.
Somebody could show up with
It's
a
going to
big
become
umbrella.
like it was before. The entrance to the library, which is a large, nice entrance, will end up being a spot for people to hang out. There's no place to sit, though.
Well, you could.
So I don't think
Put
it's dead
seats.
because all it takes is a little creativity.
Yeah,
I think that'll happen someday. I do know that right out
If it's
here in
needed.
front of the new Arts Council
Yeah.
building, when it will happen, will be a very nice terrace to sit on.
Yes, but it won't be sheltered from the elements. It won't have any kind of roof over it.
Well, my personal opinion about shelter from the elements is that they are compact and portable these days. Nobody needs to get wet
The
outside.
university has been